I used to think it was just bedbugs, Jack whispered, his voice barely audible over the steady hum of the therapy room's air purifier. But it wasn't. He sat with his feet barely touching the floor, eyes fixed on a sketch pad he gripped with pale, slender fingers. Across from him, Dr. Morgan, the hospital's child psychologist, leaned forward gently. "What do you think it was, Jack?" she asked softly. The boy looked up slowly, eyes wide, unblinking. It was her. Weeks earlier, the world had been simpler. The sun still filtered through the blinds of a quiet bedroom in a worn two-story house on the edge of Springfield. Jack had been unpacking a box of books, his stuffed bear propped against the foot of the bed like an old friend watching over him. His mother, Amelia, hummed in the kitchen below, the smell of grilled cheese rising faintly through the floorboards. The house was old, with weathered wood and creaking floors, but it was affordable. After Henry, Jack's father, lost half his hours at the woodworking shop, they'd been forced to leave their apartment in the city center. This house, nestled beside a pine-covered hill, came at half the price and twice the quiet. The landlord, Mr. Donald Lawson, was a reclusive man who lived in a small flat out back. Amelia had tried to welcome him with cookies and an invitation to dinner. He declined without smiling. "I don't eat with strangers," he had said before closing the door. That night, Jack went to bed early, tired from the move. His parents kissed him goodnight and turned off the light. Hours later, in the stillness of midnight, Amelia sat up in bed, heart pounding. There it was again, the scratching, not from outside, from Jack's room. She rushed in, flicked on the light, and gasped. Jack was sitting upright, his fingers raking violently down his arms, blood spotting the sleeves of his pajamas. "Jack," she cried, rushing to him. "It itches, Mom," he sobbed. "It itches everywhere." Henry followed behind, groggy but alert now. He took one look at the red welts on his son's arms and winced. "Oh, buddy, let me see." Jack turned, showing his back, already scratched raw. Amelia ran to the bathroom for cream, her hands shaking. "It's just like last night," Jack murmured, trembling in her arms. And the night before. The sheets were spotted with blood. The itching hadn't started until after bedtime. That first night, Amelia had assumed it was mosquitoes. The next night, she washed all the bedding, scrubbed the rooms, sprayed insect repellent. Nothing helped. "I checked the mattress," Henry said the following afternoon, his voice tight with frustration. "No bugs, no droppings, not even dust mites." "Then what is it?" Amelia whispered, eyes red with exhaustion. Jack had fallen asleep on the couch, fingers twitching even in slumber. Small blisters had begun to form on the soles of his feet. It didn't make sense. No known allergen, no fever, no obvious rash, just this relentless, unbearable itching. Amelia glanced toward the stairs. It started the moment he lay down, not while playing, not during the day, just nighttime, just in that room. Henry said nothing for a long time. Then he looked up, brow furrowed. "That wall next to his bed, that's the storage room, right? The one Lawson keeps locked?" She nodded. "He said it's just filled with junk, hasn't been open in 20 years. Henry got up. "I want to hear it myself." They walked up the creaky staircase and stepped into Jack's room. The boy's bed was now stripped bare. His stuffed bear lay on the floor, one ear bent. Henry pressed his palm against the old wooden wall beside the bed. Cold, damp. He leaned closer, pressed his ear to it. Silence. Amelia joined him. "Smell that?" He nodded slowly. "Like earth and rust, but sweeter, almost metallic. I cleaned everything. The walls, the windows. That smell won't go." That night, Jack barely slept. He thrashed beneath the covers, whispering through clenched teeth. "It's crawling on me. It's touching me. Mom." Amelia stayed by his side until morning, her hand clutching his. By the fourth night, he began talking in his sleep. Not just words, names, begging. "Please," he mumbled, "I'm still here. Don't leave me here. I can't scream." Henry and Amelia stared at each other, wide-eyed. The next morning they made a decision. No more waiting. Amelia called Dr. Sarah Jacobs in the city and begged for an urgent appointment. "Please," she pleaded, "my son. It's like something's poisoning him." Jack sat quietly in the back seat as they drove to Springfield General. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale. He didn't speak, he didn't scratch, but as they passed the trees on the side of the road, he whispered, not looking up. "She's still whispering." Sarah Jacobs was calm, efficient, a woman in her 40s, with a kind face but steady hands. She examined the lesions, the inflammation, the thin red lines etched into Jack's skin like a cry for help. "This doesn't look like insect bites," she said, pointing to a particularly raw patch. "And it's not eczema either. We need to do a biopsy. And run a blood panel. I'd also like to know more about your home." Amelia told her everything. The house, the landlord, the locked room. Sarah's expression changed subtly. "Right next to his bed?" she asked. "Yes, but it's padlocked. We've never been inside." Sarah paused, then said firmly, "I'd like to come inspect your home myself." Later that day, as Jack lay on a bench in the hospital hallway, Amelia brushed his hair back with trembling fingers. "Please don't scratch anymore, baby." Jack looked up, tears filling his eyes. "It won't stop. It's not the itching, Mom. It's her voice. She won't stop crying." Jack slept most of the drive home, his body curled against the car door, clutching his stuffed bear like it was the last anchor to something real. Amelia glanced into the rearview mirror often, her eyes puffy and dark. Henry sat beside her, jaw tight, knuckles white on the wheel. "What if it's mold?" Amelia whispered. "We didn't think of that." "Mold doesn't cause voices," Henry muttered. "Or that smell." As they turned the final bend onto their street, the old house loomed ahead like a memory that refused to fade. The pine trees stood like silent watchers. The paint was peeling on the upper level, and the porch creaked even before they stepped on it. Amelia unlocked the door slowly. The air inside felt heavier than usual, as if the house had exhaled while they were away and was now holding its breath. Jack stirred and looked up. "She's quiet," he said softly. Amelia froze. "What do you mean? She's still there." "Just quiet today." Henry exchanged a look with his wife, then picked Jack up gently and carried him inside. They laid him down on the living room couch away from the bedroom and gave him warm soup. He didn't touch it. His eyes stayed on the staircase. Later that evening, when Jack was finally resting, Henry stood at the base of the stairs, staring upward. The wooden steps were warped in places, groaning under pressure. Amelia joined him, arms crossed tightly. "I can't stop thinking about that room," he said. "It's right there, right next to our son, and we've never even seen inside." "He said it's locked," she replied. "I don't care." They went upstairs together. Jack's room was dimly lit with a soft yellow lamp on the bedside table. The bed was untouched, stripped bare. His drawings, once cheerful, now lay scattered in the corner, dark shapes and faceless figures. Henry walked to the far wall, where Jack's headboard had once rested. He placed his hand on the cold wooden surface again, then knocked twice. The sound was dull, solid. But Amelia's attention turned to the baseboard. "Look at that," she whispered. There was a narrow gap between the floor and the wall, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. From it, a faint, earthy scent wafted upward, like old leaves and something else, something decayed. "It's coming from the other side," she said. Henry knelt and tried to peer through, but the gap was too narrow. Without a word, he stood and walked out of the room. She followed him, heart racing. "What are you doing? I'm going to talk to him." They walked out the back door, through the yard overgrown with grass and pine needles. Mr. Donald's small flat was a crooked box of rotting wood, a rusted mailbox hanging off one nail. A faint glow spilled from the window. Henry knocked, once, then twice harder. After a long pause, the door opened a crack. Donald's face appeared, aged like old paper, deep lines, pale skin, thinning white hair. His eyes were sharp, shadowed beneath bushy brows. "What is it?" he asked flatly. "Good evening," Henry began, forcing civility. "Sorry to bother you so late. We just wanted to ask you about the locked room upstairs. I told you. Storage." Donald's voice had no warmth, nothing in there but old furniture and boxes. "There's a smell," Amelia added gently. "It's seeping into our son's room. And something's not right. He's been sick. We'd like to take a quick look." Donald's eyes narrowed. "I lost the key years ago." Henry didn't back down. "Do you mind if we open it then? We can call a locksmith. You'll damage the door." Amelia's tone softened further. "Please. It's about our son. He's not sleeping. He's hearing things." Donald looked from one to the other. Something flickered in his eyes. "Discomfort? Fear? No one's been in that room for 20 years, he said, and I like it that way." He shut the door without another word. Henry stared at the closed door for a long time. The next day, Dr. Sarah arrived with a man named Anthony Morgan, an environmental technician from the hospital. He was tall, wore glasses, and carried 2 heavy cases filled with equipment. Amelia welcomed them inside and led them upstairs. Anthony began placing sensors along the floor, the air vents, and the wall that connected to the locked room. Sarah stood near the doorway, taking notes. Jack sat curled in a blanket on the couch downstairs, watching cartoons without blinking. "I'm getting elevated levels here," Anthony said, kneeling beside the wall. "How high?" Sarah asked. Anthony hesitated. "Too high for comfort. If formaldehyde's been leaking through these boards, and your son's bed was placed right here," Sarah closed her notebook, "we'll need to collect air samples over a 24-hour period to confirm, but this isn't just a coincidence." "Where's the landlord?" Anthony asked. "He wouldn't let us in the other room," Amelia said. "Claims he lost the key." Anthony stood up, expression unreadable. "We may need to call the county." That night, as Amelia tucked Jack into the couch downstairs, he pulled at her hand. "She's close again," he whispered. Amelia leaned in. "Who, sweetheart?" "The woman in the wall," he murmured. "She doesn't like that we're trying to open the door." Amelia blinked. "What do you mean?" "She's scared. She's been there too long. She thinks if we open it, she'll disappear." The air in the room dropped a few degrees. Henry came downstairs, face pale. "He's not making this up, Amelia." "I know," she said, tears forming. "I know." At midnight, Henry got up and walked quietly back upstairs. The house groaned with every step. He stood again in Jack's empty bedroom, staring at that wall. He bent down, put his ear against it. Nothing. He knocked, softly, once, twice, then. He thought he heard something. Not a voice, not words, just movement. Faint, like fingers brushing wood. He stood quickly and stepped back. From the corner of his eye, the gap in the baseboard seemed darker than before, deeper, alive. The next morning, the hospital called with the first set of results. Dr. Sarah Jacobs stood beside a window in her office, holding Jack's blood report in one hand, her phone pressed to her ear with the other. Her brows furrowed deeper with each line she read. There was no evidence of infection, no viruses, no parasites, no fungal activity, but the inflammatory markers were high, and so were his white blood cell counts. It was the kind of response seen in prolonged exposure to an irritant, something environmental, something persistent. She hung up and walked straight to the hallway where Jack was waiting, sitting cross-legged on a small bench, his fingers twitching in his lap. Amelia sat beside him, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Henry stood leaning against the wall, staring at the tiled floor, his eyes dark with fatigue. Sarah knelt down in front of Jack, her voice calm. "Hi there, Jack. How are you feeling today?" Jack looked at her, eyes distant. "She didn't talk last night," he said. "She just cried." Sarah blinked. "Who cried, sweetheart?" Jack didn't answer. Henry spoke up. "We need to know what's happening to our son." "I know," Sarah said, standing. "And I think we're getting closer." She led them into a small consultation room, sterile and cold under the fluorescent lights. She placed a file on the desk and opened it. First, Jack's test results show elevated immune activity. Nothing infectious. That tells us this isn't an illness. It's a reaction. Something external is affecting his body. Amelia leaned forward. "What kind of reaction?" Sarah paused. His skin biopsy confirmed exposure to a chemical compound, one commonly used in industrial settings. Formaldehyde. Henry's brow furrowed. "That's like what they use in embalming?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "Also in certain adhesives, pressed wood furniture, and old insulation. But the levels we're seeing in Jack's body suggest prolonged exposure. Not something he touched once. It's something he's been around for weeks, maybe months." Amelia's face paled. "But we don't use anything like that at home. Are there any renovations, new furniture, harsh cleaning products?" "No," Henry said. "The house is old. Everything in it is probably from the last century. We brought all our own things, no recent changes." Sarah took a breath. "Then I'm concerned the source may be embedded in the house itself, or more specifically, in that locked room next to Jack's bed." There was a heavy silence. "We need to get in there," Henry said flatly. "I agree," Sarah answered. "Until we do, I'll be working with the environmental team to test the air and surface levels throughout the home. I'll also file a formal request to involve the county's health department." As they left the room, Jack suddenly stopped in the hallway. He turned to face a blank wall, then lifted one hand and gently touched the surface. "She's hiding," he whispered. Amelia reached out, gently pulling his hand away. "Come on, baby. Let's go home." Back at the house, Anthony Morgan was setting up additional equipment. He placed formaldehyde detectors in the living room, hallway, bathroom, and again along the wall of Jack's bedroom. Henry hovered close, asking questions. "So what happens if the readings go up again?" "We'll isolate the source," Anthony explained. Right now the highest levels are still at the point closest to the locked room. That's not coincidental. Could it be old wood? Henry asked. Or rotting insulation? It's possible, Anthony said. But not at these levels. We're talking about something far more concentrated. Formaldehyde doesn't just leak, it has to be released. That evening they moved Jack's sleeping area downstairs again. Amelia set up a fold-out mattress, layered with freshly washed sheets. She sat beside him as he curled up, bear in hand, eyes red from scratching. "Mom," he whispered, "what happens if we open the door?" Amelia blinked. "What do you mean? What if she doesn't want us to?" Amelia's voice trembled. "There's no one there, baby." Jack shook his head slowly. "She doesn't want to be found. But she doesn't want to be alone either." Amelia swallowed hard. "Just try to rest, I'm right here." Upstairs, Henry stood in Jack's empty bedroom staring again at the wall. The room was quiet. Too quiet. He placed a chair in the corner and sat, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the boards. Hours passed. At 2:17 a.m. he heard it. Soft, subtle, like breathing. He stood, leaned in. The sounds stopped. A cold draft curled around his legs. Though the windows were sealed, something in his gut turned. He left the room, returned downstairs, and didn't say a word. The next morning, Anthony returned with overnight data. The readings were conclusive. "We have a problem," he said. "The formaldehyde levels on the upstairs wall are now 12 times the federal safety limit. Whatever's behind that wall, it's toxic." Sarah nodded. "We're calling the authorities." By noon, the Springfield Department of Public Health had been notified. 2 inspectors arrived, a man named Michael Thompson and a woman named Alexandra Rogers. Both wore masks and carried professional-grade air analyzers. "We'll need to enter that locked room," Alexandra said, scanning the upstairs hallway. "With or without the landlord's consent." Henry nodded. He's still not answering his door. Michael glanced at the readings from Anthony's equipment. "We'll prepare to breach if needed." But just as they prepared to take action, there was a knock at the front door. Donald Lawson stood in the doorway, as pale and rigid as ever. He looked at the unfamiliar faces, then at Henry. "You called the government on me?" "We're trying to save our son," Henry said. "Whatever's behind that door is poisoning him." Donald's eyes were unreadable. "That room hasn't been touched in 20 years. "Then let us see for ourselves." Donald said nothing. Then slowly, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small ring of old keys. He tossed them to the floor. "I won't be responsible for what you find." He turned and walked away. Michael bent down and picked up the keys. Everyone watched in silence. Jack, from his spot on the couch, looked up at his mother. "She's scared," he said softly. Amelia's heart raced. "Who, sweetheart?" Jack's voice trembled. The woman behind the wall. The house had never felt colder. Even in the middle of a late summer afternoon, the upstairs hallway seemed to breathe frost. A silence pressed against the walls, not emptiness, but the kind that came just before something broke open. Henry stood outside the locked door with the ring of old keys in his hand. Each one was rusted, long unused. They clinked against each other like bones. Amelia held Jack in her arms downstairs, watching the inspectors and technicians prepare equipment for the room they hadn't dared to touch. Jack's skin had flared again overnight, red welts reappearing despite the move to a downstairs space. His hands trembled even when he wasn't scratching. Michael Thompson adjusted the strap of his protective mask and looked toward Henry. "Whenever you're ready." Henry nodded, but didn't move. He stared at the doorknob. The paint was flaking off the wood around it, the edges slightly bowed. He inserted one of the older keys. It didn't fit. He tried another. Still nothing. The third turned with a faint click. Everyone held their breath. Henry looked over his shoulder. "If it smells strong, we stop immediately." Anthony raised a detector and nodded. "We'll be monitoring air levels every second." Henry slowly turned the knob. The door groaned open an inch, and the hinges protested. A thin draft leaked out, sour and musty, filled with dampness and time. Michael stepped forward and pushed it open wider with his shoulder. The light from the hallway spilled inside. Dust floated like snowflakes through a sunbeam, disturbed after decades of stillness. The room was dark, no windows, no bulbs. Alexandra flicked on her flashlight and swept it across the interior. Old furniture lay scattered under faded cloths. A wooden dresser cracked along the side. 2 chairs stacked against each other. A desk missing a leg. But in the center of the room, beneath a sheet that had sunken with age, was something different, something slumped. Michael stepped forward. The air monitor in his hand began to beep faster. Behind him, Jack stirred suddenly downstairs. He sat up straight on the couch, eyes wide. "She's watching," he whispered. Amelia looked at him. "Sweetheart?" But Jack didn't respond. His gaze was locked on something invisible far beyond the walls. Upstairs, Henry reached the center of the room. He knelt down and pulled the tarp away. Everyone froze. It was a chair, a simple wooden chair with an upright back and curved legs, and in it, a body, mummified. Shrunken, slumped forward, the hands were bound to the arms of the chair with frayed rope. The mouth was sealed shut, not with tape but something far worse, cement, hardened, cracked at the edges, as if someone had stuffed her mouth full and plastered over it. Michael dropped the tarp. "Oh my God," Alexandra murmured, backing toward the hallway. Sarah Jacobs stepped inside, her hand pressed against her mask. "We need to call the police. Now." Henry staggered backward, breathing hard. His vision spun. The readings on Anthony's device spiked, formaldehyde off the scale. Downstairs, Jack began to cry. "She's not mad," he whispered. "She's just lonely." Hours later, yellow tape crossed the front entrance of the house. Police cruisers lined the road. Neighbors gathered behind fences, whispering. The corpse was carefully photographed, the bindings documented, and samples taken from the cement. Inspector James Carter, from Springfield PD, stood in the upstairs hallway, reviewing the first reports. A solid man in his 40s, his expression was carved from stone. Sarah handed him the preliminary results. "This isn't just decomposition. The chemicals match formaldehyde concentrations consistent with long-term exposure. That's what was leaking into Jack's room." James looked inside the storage room again, then turned to Laura Martin, a forensic investigator from San Francisco called in to consult. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" he asked. Laura slowly stepped into the room, her flashlight casting shadows on the walls. She stared at the body. "I've seen people silenced," she said, "but never like this." Downstairs, Jack sat between his parents as paramedics ran a basic health check. Amelia held his hand, tears tracing lines down her cheeks. "Mom?" Jack whispered. "I'm here, baby. Her name is Mary." Amelia blinked. "What?" "She told me. In the dream. Her name is Mary Walker." Amelia turned to Henry, who stared at their son in disbelief. Did someone tell him that?" Henry asked. "No one," Sarah said, kneeling down beside them. "That name hasn't been mentioned. Not yet." Jack was pale but calm now, as though something had lifted. "She's not trapped anymore," he said. "She knows we found her." Back upstairs, Laura continued her inspection. Near the back corner of the room, she found a decayed wooden chest. She pried it open. Inside were old books, torn clothing, and a small black wooden box with a faded gold clasp. Inside, folded tightly, were letters. And a journal. She slipped on gloves, opened the first page. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged with old water stains. March 3, 2006, he locked the door from the outside. He said I talked too much. Said I embarrassed him. I asked to leave. He said, "You're mine. This is your home." Laura's heart sank. She flipped further. March 9, 2006, I screamed. I thought the neighbors would hear. I saw someone in the yard. I tried to call. He gagged me with a wet cloth. I thought I would choke. March 15, 2006, he said I could never leave, that if I didn't shut up he'd make me quiet forever. The last entry was barely legible. March 18, 2006, my mouth burns. He did it. Cement. It's still wet. I can't breathe. I can't. The ink stopped mid-word. Laura closed the journal, her fingers trembling. In that moment, the pieces began to fall into place. Back downstairs, James approached Henry and Amelia. "We believe the body belongs to a woman named Mary Walker. She was reported missing 19 years ago. Her husband claimed she left him and disappeared." Henry whispered, "Donald?" James nodded. "He was her husband." Amelia gripped Jack tighter. "He's been living behind our house all this time," the inspector continued. "We're issuing a warrant now. He'll be brought in for questioning tonight. I'm sorry your family was exposed to this, but your son may have just solved a murder that no one else did." Jack looked up, blinking. "I didn't solve anything," he said. "She just needed someone to listen." Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the street. The house, quiet now, stood still beneath the weight of its buried secret. But for the first time in 19 years, someone had finally heard the whisper behind the wall. The interrogation room was cold, lit by a single fluorescent light that flickered now and then, humming like a dying insect. Donald Lawson sat with his arms folded across his chest, the same blank expression he'd worn when he handed over the keys. He didn't blink often. His eyes remained fixed on the table, as though it might offer him shelter from the truth that had already begun to rise. Across from him sat Inspector James Carter and Laura Martin. James had seen hardened men break after 5 minutes. He'd seen guilt surface in the form of sweat, tapping feet, trembling hands. Donald did none of those things. "You understand why you're here," James said calmly. "We found a body in your locked storage room. A woman, bound to a chair, mouth sealed with cement." Donald blinked once. "I haven't been in that room for years." "It was locked from the outside," Laura added, her voice sharp. "You said you lost the key, then you found it. Convenient." "I didn't remember where it was until yesterday," he replied. James leaned forward. "The body matches the physical description of your wife. Mary Walker reported missing in 2006. She left," Donald said flatly. "Did she take her things?" Laura asked. "Her wallet? Her clothes? Her favorite book?" "She said she was tired of the marriage. She walked out. No one ever saw her again. She didn't want to be seen." James opened a folder and placed it on the table. Inside were photos, crime scene images, the body in the chair, the ropes, the cement. A copy of the journal lay beneath the photos, partially redacted for evidence handling. Donald glanced down briefly, then looked away. "These were her final words," Laura said quietly. "Written in fear, written while gagged, bound and locked away in your house." Donald's fingers twitched. "I never touched her," he said suddenly. "She chose to stay." "She chose to have cement poured in her mouth?" James snapped. "I never killed her. You imprisoned her. You silenced her. She wouldn't stop screaming." Laura narrowed her eyes. "So you made sure she couldn't." There was a long pause. Donald leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly. "She embarrassed me," he said at last. In the hallway outside the room, Amelia sat with Jack beside her, their forms small against the stark white benches. Jack was curled up under a hospital-issued blanket, sketching something quietly in his lap. It was a picture of a woman, long hair, closed eyes, standing behind a wooden door. "She's not in pain anymore," he whispered. Amelia looked at the drawing. "Did she tell you that?" Jack nodded. "She said it's quiet now." Meanwhile, James and Laura stood outside the interview room, watching Donald through the one-way glass. The man had gone still again, his hands folded neatly like a man waiting for a cup of tea. "He's not going to crack," James muttered. "Because he doesn't think he did anything wrong," Laura replied. "To him, silence is control, and control is love." James flipped through the file in his hand. "We need to talk to someone who knew her. Someone from before." "I have a name," Laura said. "Rose Atkinson. Neighbor. Lived across from Donald and Mary back in 2006, 10 miles away, in a modest home wrapped in red grapevines." Rose Atkinson answered her door with cautious eyes and a hand still dusted with flour. She was in her 70s now, her silver hair tied in a bun. When she saw the badges, her shoulders stiffened. "I knew this day would come," she said softly. Laura and James stepped inside, sitting in her floral living room, the air thick with the scent of bread and lavender. Rose sat opposite them, wringing her hands in her lap. "She was sweet," Rose began. "Merry, gentle, always smiling. We used to walk to the market together, talk about books, about dreams." James nodded. "Did you notice anything strange back then?" "I noticed everything," Rose said bitterly. "The bruises, the way she flinched when he called her name, how she stopped laughing after the first year. She once told me, if I ever disappeared, don't believe I left willingly. I remember that word for word. Did you tell anyone?" "I tried. But Donald," Rose's voice faltered. "He had friends in town, people who respected him. He was quiet, but the kind of quiet that made people afraid to dig deeper. I told an officer once. He said there was no evidence, no reason to investigate." Laura leaned forward. "Would you be willing to testify?" Rose hesitated. "Will it matter now?" Laura placed her hand gently on the older woman's. "It will matter to Mary." Later that evening, back at the police department, Donald was escorted to a holding cell. His expression remained unchanged. As the door shut behind him, the echo of metal rang down the hall like a bell marking the end of something sacred. Inside the cell, he sat down on the cold metal bench and stared at the wall. His fingers drummed against his leg rhythmically. A whisper, almost inaudible, escaped his lips. She should have stayed quiet. The next day, Springfield buzzed with the story. News vans lined the street. Neighbors who once waved to Donald now stared at his property like it was cursed ground. School parents whispered behind closed doors. Teachers sat in emergency meetings planning support for Jack and his family. Back at the hospital, Jack woke in the middle of the night, eyes wide and breathing fast. Amelia sat up instantly. "Baby, what is it?" Jack looked around the dark room, then out the window. "She's outside," he whispered. "Just looking, not sad anymore." Amelia held him close. "She knows you helped her." "No," Jack said softly. "She helped me." In the police lab, Laura unfolded Mary's journal once more. She read the last page again and again. Each word burned into her memory. The pain, the isolation, the courage of a woman whose voice was stolen, but who wrote, even when her mouth was sealed. Back in Donald's flat, the search team found an old cement bag in the shed. It matched the material used in Mary's mouth. Rope fibers, identical to the bindings on the chair, lay tangled in a dusty corner. Bits of cloth, stained with faded blood, were bagged for evidence. The last piece was found beneath a floorboard, a photograph. Mary standing in sunlight, a book in one hand, smiling. Laura stared at it long after everyone else had left the room. "She never stopped speaking," she whispered. "She just needed someone to listen." Henry sat alone in the hospital hallway, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to light a cigarette. It had been years since his last one. He'd quit when Jack was born, but tonight the urge hit him like a wave. The lighter clicked 3 times before catching. He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling upward like a prayer no one was listening to. Through the glass window to Jack's room, he could see Amelia seated at their son's bedside, stroking his hair. Jack was asleep, finally, his skin no longer inflamed, his breathing slow and even. But Henry knew that the damage had already been done, not just physically, but to something deeper, something invisible. Their home had become a grave, and they hadn't even realized it. He pressed the cigarette to his lips again, but didn't inhale. His shoulders slumped, and the tears came quietly. He wasn't the kind of man who cried, not when his father died, not when they lost their old apartment. But now he felt like a man who had failed to protect what mattered most. Inside the room, Amelia looked up and saw him through the glass. She didn't say anything. She just offered a tired, knowing look, one that spoke of shared guilt and survival, of love that had been dragged through fire. Jack stirred slightly and whispered in his sleep, "She's quiet now." Amelia leaned in. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe." "She said thank you," Jack mumbled. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Outside the hospital, Springfield was no longer silent. News spread faster than wildfire. The front page of every local paper carried Mary Walker's name. Old photos were shared across social media, smiling, hopeful images from before she vanished. Radio stations interviewed legal experts. Talk shows debated how a woman could disappear for nearly 2 decades without anyone noticing. "How does someone die in a suburban house and no one hears a thing?" one commentator asked. The answer was always the same: people saw what they wanted to see and ignored the rest. At the police department, Chief Inspector James Carter stood in front of a wall now covered with printed timelines, evidence tags, photographs, and handwritten notes. The Mary Walker case file, once closed, was now front and center. Laura Martin entered with 2 fresh reports in hand. "Lab results are in," she said. "The cement used to seal Mary's mouth matches the remnants found in Donald's shed. The rope fibers, same batch. No doubt about it." James nodded. "He's going away forever." "That's not all," Laura added. "I've been cross-referencing old missing persons cases from the area. There's another one. A woman named Anna Parsons went missing in 2003. Also from Springfield." James turned. "Donald again?" "She rented a room from him for 2 months before she vanished." James exhaled. "Do we have anything concrete?" "Not yet," Laura said. "But the timing fits. So does the pattern." James crossed his arms. "Reopen it, quietly. If there's even a chance, we need to know." Back at the hospital, Jack opened his eyes to find a school psychologist named Lucy Morgan sitting beside him. She smiled gently, holding a soft-bound notebook. "I'm not here to test you," she said kindly. "I'm just someone who listens." Jack didn't speak at first. He stared at the notebook. "Do you like drawing?" she asked. Jack nodded slightly. "Would you draw something for me? Anything you want?" He picked up the pencil and began sketching. Slowly, lines became shapes, shapes became a room, a wooden floor, a chair, a shadow in the corner. "She used to cry," he said quietly. "But she doesn't anymore." Lucy watched him. "Do you miss her?" "I didn't know her," Jack said, "but I feel like I did. She was always with me. I think she was just waiting." Henry returned to the room, slipping quietly inside. He kissed Jack's forehead and sat beside Amelia. For a while, the 3 of them simply sat there, no one speaking, the weight of survival heavy in the air. Later that afternoon, Principal Benson of Jack's school called a meeting with teachers and staff. He stood at the head of a long table in the faculty lounge, his expression grave. "I want to make this clear," he said. "Jack didn't just go through something traumatic. He helped bring a murderer to justice. He should be treated with respect, not fear." Some teachers nodded. Others looked uncertain. Beatrice Moore, Jack's homeroom teacher, raised her hand. "What about the other students?" "We'll speak to parents," Benson said. "We'll offer counseling. But we protect Jack. That's our job now." Meanwhile, Donald Lawson sat alone in his detention cell, staring at the white wall across from him. He hadn't spoken since the last interrogation. The guard said he barely slept, barely moved. His court-appointed attorney, Vincent Adams, visited that evening, dropping a thick folder on the table between them. "You've been charged with first-degree murder, concealment of a corpse, psychological torture, endangering a minor," he said without flinching. "They're asking for life without parole." Donald looked up slowly. She should have listened. Vincent's jaw tightened. "You're talking about a woman who begged for her life in her final journal entries. You sealed her mouth with cement." "She wouldn't stop crying," Donald said flatly. Vincent stood. "Then cry to yourself in here. You'll be doing it for the rest of your life." Back in the hospital, Jack stood beside the window, looking out at the city lights. He turned to Amelia. "Can we move?" She walked over and hugged him from behind. "We're already looking. Somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. Will there be trees? Lots of them. Will there be no locked rooms?" She paused. "None. Ever again." That night, Henry sat beside Jack as he drifted off to sleep. The boy's breathing was soft, peaceful, no twitches, no whispers. Amelia stood at the door, watching them. "He's healing," she whispered. Henry nodded. "So are we." In the quiet stillness of the hospital room, with the machines humming gently, they finally began to believe that the worst was behind them, but not forgotten, never forgotten. The courthouse stood like a monument to quiet justice, old bricks stained with decades of rain, its columns chipped and faded but still standing tall. Inside, the air was heavy with something no one could name, part dread, part expectation. The case had drawn national attention. Reporters lined the front steps, cameras flashing as soon as the transport van pulled up. Inside it, Donald Lawson sat cuffed, his face unreadable, his shoulders rigid with the kind of silence only a man like him could carry. Henry and Amelia arrived early, flanked by officers who cleared a path through the crowd. Jack wasn't with them. He was staying at a friend's home, far away from the chaos. But his story was everywhere. The boy who heard her had become a phrase in headlines, on morning shows, even among online forums. Some called him haunted, others called him brave. But no one questioned anymore whether something had been calling to him from that wall. In the courtroom, the tension built like a rising tide. Donald sat behind the defense table, suit pressed, face clean-shaven, expression stone-cold. He didn't look around. He didn't acknowledge anyone. When Agnes Walker entered the courtroom, the silence broke. Mary's sister hadn't spoken publicly in years. The last time anyone had seen her was the day she'd handed out flyers with Mary's face on them, weeping at the bus station. Now older, her posture bent slightly with grief. She carried a small folder to the front row and sat down without a word. She didn't look at Donald. She didn't need to. The prosecution opened with photographs, images of Mary's remains, the room, the ropes, the cement. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Several people covered their mouths. The jury leaned forward, eyes fixed on each image. "This is not just a case of domestic violence," the district attorney said. "This is premeditated isolation. It is torture. It is murder committed in slow motion, in the dark, with deliberate cruelty." Donald showed no reaction. Then came the journal. Laura Martin took the stand, describing the process of discovery, how the room had been sealed for nearly 2 decades, how environmental data led them to the hidden chamber. She read aloud passages from Mary's final days, her voice steady, though everyone could hear the tremor beneath it. March 15, 2006. "He said I could never leave, that if I didn't shut up he'd make me quiet forever." Laura paused, glancing at the jury. This was not just control, this was complete erasure. And yet, even with her mouth sealed, Mary found a way to speak. When Agnes was called to the stand, the room held its breath. She unfolded a single piece of paper and read it without looking up. "Mary was my sister. She liked honey in her tea. She laughed too loudly at jokes. She believed in second chances. She called me every Sunday. And then one day, she didn't. I knew something was wrong. I knew. But the police said there was no sign of foul play. They said women leave all the time." She looked up, eyes burning, but Mary didn't leave. She was taken. Slowly, silently. And the man who took her sat in that house for 19 years like nothing happened. But I remember. I never stopped remembering. Donald didn't flinch. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed around every person exiting the building. Agnes slipped quietly into a waiting car. Amelia stood beside Henry, her hands trembling. "I didn't know a person could carry that much grief for so long," she whispered. "She was the only one who never gave up," Henry replied. Back in their temporary rental house, Jack sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of him. The first page had only one sentence, written in careful block letters. "When you listen to silence, sometimes it speaks back." He stared at it for a long moment, then began writing. He didn't write about ghosts, or about Mary. He didn't even mention Donald. Instead, he wrote about the way the wall felt cold at night, about the dream he had where he stood in a meadow, and a woman smiled at him from under a tree. She didn't speak, but he understood her anyway. He wrote about the sound of her footsteps on the wood above him, and how he always felt safest when he could hear her there. Downstairs, Amelia packed another box. Books, dishes, winter coats. They were leaving Springfield for good. A new house waited for them 3 towns over, with white shutters and an attic that had already been inspected twice. Henry walked in carrying a stack of mail. "Nothing but bills and bad news," he muttered. But among the letters was one in a pale blue envelope, addressed to Jack Walker. Amelia opened it carefully. Inside was a card with no return address. Just a typed message. "Thank you for hearing what no one else did. You brought her home." A friend. They stared at it in silence. Jack didn't ask who sent it. He simply nodded and tucked it between the pages of his notebook. Meanwhile, Laura and James continued to dig into Anna Parsons's case. They visited the old library where she used to volunteer, spoke with her former roommate, and eventually tracked down her sister in another state. She was quiet, the sister said, shy but kind, said she'd found a cheap room to rent while she figured things out. I never heard from her again. Laura showed her a photo of Donald Lawson. The woman's face turned to stone. "That's him. That's the guy who rented her the room." James scribbled down a note. "We'll need a search warrant for Donald's property." 3 days later, under the crawl space of the tool shed, they found a small metal tin. Inside were items belonging to Anna, an ID, an earring, a dried rose. It wasn't enough to prove murder, but it was enough to start asking louder questions. Back in the courtroom, the prosecution rested their case. Donald's defense offered no rebuttal, no witnesses, no testimony. He refused to speak. The jury returned a verdict in under 3 hours. Guilty, life in prison. No possibility of parole. When the sentence was read, Donald's expression didn't change. He stood as the bailiff escorted him out, his hands in cuffs, his head high. But there was no triumph, no regret, just the empty pride of a man who had built a kingdom of silence and watched it collapse. Outside the courthouse, Agnes wept, not with grief, with release. "Thank you," she whispered to Amelia, hugging her tightly, "for believing him, for believing her." Amelia held her close. "We only did what we had to." "No," Agnes said. "You did what no one else dared." That night, Jack finished his journal entry. He wrote, "Sometimes, the scariest ghosts aren't the ones who want to hurt you. They're the ones who were hurt, and no one listened. Mary didn't haunt me. She just waited, and I think maybe she was hoping someone would finally say her name." He closed the notebook and looked out the window. No shadows, no whispers, just stars. The new house sat on the edge of a small town called Willow Ridge, nestled between gentle hills and winding country roads. It was a white 2-story home with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, the kind that looked like it belonged on the cover of a home magazine. The air smelled like pine and distant rain. Birds nested in the trees lining the property. There was a wooden fence, freshly painted, and no old sheds, no attics sealed shut, no locked rooms. Amelia had chosen it carefully. Every square inch had been inspected, tested, and retested. Henry replaced all the vents himself. They even hired a local spiritual guide, just in case, to cleanse the energy, though they never told Jack that part. They wanted peace. They wanted normal, for Jack's sake, and for theirs. Unpacking took 2 days. Jack's new room was filled with light. Large windows overlooked the backyard, where a single oak tree stood, tall and wide. He chose to place his bed near the window, said it made him feel less alone. Amelia let him pick new bedding, new curtains, even a new lamp shaped like a small moon. His old drawings were boxed up in the attic, left untouched for now. The first few nights were still. No nightmares, no voices. Jack slept through until morning, and Amelia cried quietly in the hallway the first time he did. On the 4th day, Henry grilled hamburgers in the backyard, while Jack kicked a soccer ball around the lawn. The air was cool, and the sky blushed gold as evening approached. It almost felt like a life that had always belonged to them, instead of something borrowed after a storm. But that night, Jack sat up in bed around midnight. He didn't scream, he didn't cry. He just sat there, blinking slowly, staring at the far wall of his room. Amelia, sleeping lightly as always, heard the creak of his floorboards and got up. She padded softly to his door and peeked in. "Sweetheart?" she whispered. Jack turned to look at her. His eyes were calm, not afraid. "She's not here," he said, "just someone passing by." Amelia stepped into the room, her heart thumping. "Who, baby?" Jack looked out the window, into the dark yard. "She lost her way," he whispered. "She doesn't know this isn't her house." Amelia crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped her arms around him. "There's no one here, Jack." He didn't argue. He simply let her hold him, his small body warm and quiet. The next morning, he didn't remember saying anything. Later that week, Jack's school counselor called. Jack was doing well, participating in class, making friends, but sometimes he drifted. During silent reading time, he would stare out the window. Once he asked his teacher if anyone else used to live in that desk. Another time, he drew a picture of a house that didn't match any he'd lived in. Amelia thanked the counselor and hung up. When Henry got home that evening, she told him, "He's not scared anymore," she said. "That's the difference. He's not terrified. But something's still open in him, like a window." Henry rubbed the back of his neck. "We could talk to Dr. Sarah again. We promised no more tests unless it gets worse." "I know," he said softly. "I just wish we could give him a world that doesn't whisper back." Meanwhile, across the county, Laura Martin sat in the basement of the police archives, surrounded by old cardboard boxes and the smell of dust. She had requested every missing persons file connected to Springfield from 1999 to 2007. There were dozens. She read through each one, sorting them into 2 piles, those that had strong leads and those that vanished without a trace. One case stopped her cold. Teresa Boone. Disappeared March 2001, age 19. Last seen renting a room through a classified ad in the Springfield Herald. Witness said she was nervous but hopeful. Laura flipped through the statements. The description of the landlord matched Donald. The address was 2 blocks from where Donald had lived before his final house. There had been no follow-up, no warrant, no investigation into the landlord. Laura leaned back, staring at the wall. Her gut tightened. This wasn't a one-time monster. It was a pattern. She picked up the phone and dialed James. "We've got another one," she said. Same even earlier. Back in Willow Ridge, Jack sat on the porch steps with a blank notebook in his lap. He held a pencil loosely in his fingers, watching the clouds roll overhead. He didn't feel afraid anymore. The silence didn't press against his skin the way it used to. But he could still sense it, faint vibrations in the air, like the edge of a dream you can't remember but know mattered. He began to draw. This time it wasn't a room. It was a field, a narrow dirt road, and a single mailbox standing crooked on a post. No one had shown him the photo from Teresa Boone's missing persons file, but what he drew matched it exactly. Later that night, Amelia walked past his room and saw the drawing. She paused, puzzled. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing to the figure at the edge of the road. Jack looked up. "I don't know yet," he said, "but she's trying to find her name." Amelia's blood ran cold. She didn't say anything, just kissed his forehead and walked away slowly, heart pounding. In Laura's apartment, the corkboard was filling up. 3 missing women. All had rented from Donald. All vanished without a trace. Mary had been the only one who left a record behind. Her body, her journal, her whispers through a boy's walls. The others had left only absence. Until now. James entered with a folder in hand. "We got clearance to open the pre-2005 case files. If there are more, we'll find them." Laura nodded. "We have to. Someone has to finish what she started." James looked at the board, then at Laura. "Do you believe in what the boy said? That she reached out to him?" Laura didn't hesitate. "I believe silence isn't always empty, and sometimes the ones who are gone, they're the ones paying the most attention." That night in Willow Ridge, the wind picked up. The trees rustled in a language only children and ghosts could understand. Jack slept peacefully, his arms around his bear, his notebook resting beside his pillow. On the last page he had written, "Some people disappear. Others are erased. But no one is ever truly gone until no one remembers them." He underlined the last sentence. Twice. The morning fog clung to the ground like something afraid to let go. Laura and James stood at the edge of a long-forgotten dirt path outside of Springfield, looking out at what used to be farmland. Now it was nothing but overgrown weeds and rusted fences, the bones of an old shed barely standing in the distance. "This is where she was last seen," James said, checking the map on his phone. "Teresa Boone. The landlord told police she left without warning, took a bus east. But the ticket was never used." Laura stepped over a fallen branch, her boots crunching in the wet grass. "And no one ever thought to look back here? It was private property. Owner died in 2002. Records got lost in the shuffle." Laura shook her head. "That's how they disappear. Not with noise, but with indifference." They moved slowly, scanning the ground. There were no buildings, just a collapsed greenhouse and what looked like an old fire pit. James crouched near it, using a gloved hand to lift a half-buried object from the ash. It was a ring, delicate, bent. The inscription on the inside had faded with time, but Laura could still make out the last letters. "Ressa," she exhaled, her breath visible in the cold air. She was here. James nodded. "We'll bring in ground-penetrating radar. If there's more, we'll find it." Back in Willow Ridge, Jack sat in the back seat of Amelia's car, staring out the window as they passed a line of telephone poles. He counted each one quietly in his head. 10, 11, 12. When they passed the 13th, he whispered, "She stopped here." Amelia didn't hear him. That night, Jack dreamt again, but this time it wasn't a whisper, it was a chorus. He stood in a hallway made of doors. Some were open, some sealed shut. Each one pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. Behind one of them, he heard crying. Behind another, silence so deep it felt like drowning. Then, at the end of the hall, he saw her, not Mary. Someone younger, lighter hair, standing barefoot in the middle of a field. She turned to him. "You're listening now," she said. "Help the others." Jack opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He woke with a start, sitting up in bed, drenched in sweat. Amelia rushed in, her heart pounding. "Jack?" He looked at her, wide-eyed. "She was trapped too," he said. "And there are more." In the morning, Jack asked for his notebook. He drew the hallway from his dream, the doors, the field, the girl with the light hair. Amelia stood behind him, unsure of what to say. The drawing was so detailed, too detailed. Later that day, Laura called. "We found something," she said. "It's not confirmed yet, but we're close, and we'd like to speak with Jack again." Amelia hesitated. "He's been dreaming things, seeing things. We moved to keep him safe." "I understand," Laura said, "but this isn't about danger. It's about closure." Amelia looked out the window where Jack was playing quietly in the yard. "We'll come in the morning." The next day, they sat in a small room at the police department. Jack had a glass of juice in front of him. Laura laid out several photos, not of crime scenes, but of landscapes, buildings, places. "Jack," she said gently, "do any of these look familiar?" He looked at each one slowly, then pointed to an old bus stop on the edge of a field. "She stood there," he said. "She waited for someone who never came." Laura exchanged a glance with James. "That's the last confirmed location of Anna Parsons." Jack looked up. "She still thinks she's waiting." Outside, Amelia stood beside Henry in the hallway. "He's not afraid anymore," she whispered. "That scares me the most." Henry squeezed her hand. "Because it means he's accepted it." Amelia nodded. "Because it means he's still connected." That evening, Jack sat on the porch watching the stars come out. He whispered into the air, "I'm still listening." Back at the old farmland, the radar scan revealed a shallow disturbance 6 feet wide, 8 feet long. Excavation began the next morning. By noon, they had unearthed human remains. DNA would take time, but no one doubted it. James called Laura over and handed her a small, cracked compact mirror found near the remains. The initials engraved on it? AP Anna Parsons had been found. Laura stared down at the field, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's 3. She glanced toward the horizon. "How many more are out there?" That night, Jack had another dream. This one was different. He stood in front of a tall mirror in a dark room, but his reflection wasn't his own. It was Mary's. She looked peaceful. She smiled at him, then slowly turned away and walked into the light. When he woke, he knew she was finally gone. But the others, they were still waiting. The final days of autumn stretched across Willow Ridge in long, golden streaks of sun. Leaves fell like whispered goodbyes, swirling around the porch where Jack now spent most of his afternoons, notebook in lap, a pencil dancing across the page. He didn't draw ghosts anymore. Not exactly. Now he drew doors, trees, memories, sometimes faces. faces no one else could remember. But he remembered. He always would. Inside, Amelia stirred soup on the stove while Henry replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors. Ordinary things, safe things, things they used to take for granted. On the television in the background, a reporter spoke softly over images of a small hand-dug gravesite outside Springfield. DNA had confirmed the remains found there belonged to Anna Parsons. A press conference was scheduled for the following week. Laura Martin was leading the final update on the investigation, and the world, slowly, was listening. That afternoon, Jack sat across from Laura once more. They were in the garden behind the police station, just the two of them, the wind nudging the leaves around their feet. "You said there's one more," she said gently. Jack nodded. "Maybe two." He opened his notebook to a fresh page. On it was a sketch of a motel, run-down neon sign flickering above the lobby. A narrow hallway stretched behind it. At the end of the hallway, a door slightly open. "She stayed there," Jack said. "She left something under the bed." Laura leaned closer. "Do you know her name?" Jack shook his head. "But she knows you're coming." The address, traced by cross-referencing old public housing records and classified ads, led Laura and James to an abandoned roadside motel 15 miles north of Springfield. Room 207. The walls were water-stained, the bed frame was rusted, but beneath the floorboards behind the headboard they found it, a red wallet. Inside, a photo ID, Carla Dean, reported missing in 2005. A small bracelet, a receipt, a scribbled note. "If he finds me again, I won't run. I'll fight. But if you're reading this, I guess I lost." The final piece. Donald Lawson was officially declared a serial predator and murderer. The case was closed. Public reaction exploded. News anchors framed Jack as the boy who unlocked the silence. Some called it a miracle. Others called it psychic intuition. But none could deny the truth. His dreams, his drawings, his sensitivity, whatever you named it, it had led them to the truth. But Jack wasn't interested in fame. 1 week later, he sat with Amelia and Henry at a small dedication ceremony held in front of the rebuilt Springfield Library. A new wing had been funded through a foundation started by Agnes Walker, the Mary Project, a program to help families of missing women, provide housing for survivors, and ensure that no one disappeared unnoticed again. Agnes stood at the podium, holding back tears. "Mary loved books," she said. "She believed in stories, in voices. She once told me that silence is only scary when it hides pain, but when it holds peace, it can be a beautiful thing." She looked toward Jack. "Thank you," she said, "for hearing her when the rest of us forgot how." The crowd applauded. Jack ducked his head shyly. Later, as the crowd thinned, Amelia knelt beside him. "You okay, baby?" Jack nodded. "Are they all quiet now?" she asked. Jack tilted his head, thinking. "They're not crying anymore," he said, "but sometimes I think they still whisper, just not in pain." Henry came over and scooped him into a hug. "You're safe now, kiddo. You gave them what they needed. Now it's your turn." That night, the family returned to Willow Ridge under a sky full of stars. The house felt warm, not haunted. Jack crawled into bed with his bear, his notebook on the nightstand. He reached for it and flipped to the last page. He wrote slowly, carefully. "I'm not afraid of silence anymore. I understand it now. It remembers." He underlined the last word twice, then closed the book and turned off the light. Outside, the trees whispered gently in the wind, not voices, not sorrow, just the soft rustling of a world finally at rest. And inside, Jack slept through the night, peaceful, dreamless, whole. Some voices never truly fade. They wait, in the walls in our memories, in the silence we choose to ignore. And sometimes it takes a child, unburdened by disbelief, to hear what the rest of us have forgotten. Can you imagine living beside a horror for years and never knowing it? Or worse, suspecting something was wrong but staying silent? If you were that neighbor, that teacher, that friend, what would you have done? Tonight, may we all remember, silence can hide pain, but it can also carry truth if someone's willing to listen. Tell us in the comments, do you believe some children are more sensitive to the unseen? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life inspired stories that stay with you long after the video ends.